Well, good morning again, and thank you all for being with us. And if you weren't on at the very beginning, we just want to extend our thoughts and our prayers to to everyone who may be affected and everyone who has been affected by these storms that are rolling across the country, and to all those who are affected by the wars, by the famines, by the poverty, by all of the unpeaceful conditions in this world. And what we want to do today as we come together is we want to contemplate peace, but peace as the logical destination, or the logical result, or the logical outcome, however you want to put it, of our spiritual practice. It's easy to look into the world as we see it today, with all of the terrible things that are going on. It's easy to look out there and say, my God, somebody needs to do something. Somebody needs to do something to bring about peace. But what's not so easy for us is to go within and to remove within ourselves the obstacles or the impediments to peace that are within us. If we look at our spiritual practice through the year, we've spent another year together growing. And if you look at the themes that go through the year, in January, we're going to go back to the basics. In January, we challenge ourselves to think about our ideas of what God is and how God works, and to see if we're still holding on to the same ideas we had last year. Have we expanded upon them at all? Are we growing, or are we just existing kind of a look? February, we look at love. In March and April, when Easter comes around, we look at renewal, we look at rebirth, we look at regeneration. May and June, we look at God's love coming to us in the form of mother or father. July, we look at freedom under the law. What does it mean to be free? September, we tend to look at fulfillment and work, expressing life, letting God express through us instead of trying to make a living, trying to live. October, November, we look at bounty, we look at gratitude. And in December, where we are now, we come around to the mystical. And of course, there are other things that we talk about along the way. We talk about health, we talk about spiritual practice, we talk about all sorts of things, but there are general themes that run through the year. And this idea of the mystical union, the mystical experience, is in December, because that, to us, that is the culmination of our spiritual practice, the mystical union, the conscious awareness of the presence of God as us and through us. To arrive at that point where we truly understand the meaning of the scriptures when Jesus said, I of my own self do nothing, but it is the Spirit, the Father within me that does it all. We didn't put ourselves here. We don't know how we got here. We don't know how to do the very basic things that our bodies need to survive. We don't know how to make our heart beat or stop beating. We don't know how to digest our food, but there's a loving intelligence that created us that does. And the mystical union, the mystical experience, the enlightenment, the awareness, the awakening, is when we come into the full realization, or as full as it can be at this time, right? Because it's never going to be completely full. We're always going to be expanding our idea of what God is. But when we come into the conscious awareness of our union with the presence of God, that is the end point as far as we know it in this lifetime. That is the end point. of spiritual practice. And that is peace. That is peace. It is the peace that passes understanding. This is why in New Testament Christianity, you'll hear them talk of Jesus as the Prince of Peace. So when we experience the presence of God, when we experience firsthand the love and the power of God, we experience the peace that more than just knows that it's more powerful than its enemies. That's kind of a human idea. We experience the peace that knows no enemies. For what could stand in opposition to God? And we really have to get that into our heads. What can stand in opposition to God? There's so much of what we have grown up with in our culture that leads us to believe that there are two powers, a power for good and a power for evil. And they're in a constant struggle with one another. And they will be so for a long, long time. But eventually this power for good will win out over the power of evil. Now this idea, the Prince of Light and the Prince of Darkness, the power of good and the power of evil, this kind of came into Judaism and then into Christianity after the Babylonian captivity. In ancient Judaism, the idea of the devil or Satan as we know it today in our culture just didn't exist. It just wasn't there. So Satan wasn't a power of evil that was trying to steal souls away from God. But that which was called Satan in the Old Testament was anything that would be an obstacle to us, anything that would stand in our way, an impediment along our way. And human nature kind of responds to impediments and responds to obstacles, you know. If you want your children to do something, just tell them that you don't think they can. And they'll bend over backwards to get it done because they want to prove to you. They want to prove to you that they can. So the idea was that human nature needs a little encouragement now and then. And this idea of something that provides impediments and something that provides obstacles was in the long-term good because it helped people to move out of their laziness, if you want to call it that, and to get themselves in motion. But that became twisted. That idea became twisted over the years. And of course, theologians have always been trying to solve what they call the problem of evil. You know, if God is so good, why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? Rabbi Kushner's book, which is kind of his expanding on the book of Job. And somewhere along the line, people decided that there was a power for good and a power for evil, and the bad things happened because the power for evil was seducing people and tricking them into doing evil things. And this even played out in modern times. Sherlock Holmes had his Moriarty, you know. And Holmes decided that Moriarty must exist because bad things couldn't just happen by themselves. Something had to be helping them along. You know, school buses full of children just didn't have accidents. Moriarty was out there making it happen. So the first thing that we have to remember when we start to talk about this idea of peace, we have to define what we mean by peace. Right? There's a human definition of peace, and then there's a spiritual understanding of peace. And what we want to stay with is the spiritual understanding of peace, not the human definition. See, the human definition of peace, we've been working at that one for as long as recorded history tells us, and probably before people decided to write it down. And the human understanding of peace tends to go something like this. Once we have defeated all our enemies, well, then we'll have peace. Once we have converted all of our enemies to our way of thinking, believing, and acting, or then we'll have peace. Or once we have built up an arsenal so powerful that no one would dare go against us, why then we'll have peace. And of course, none of that has worked. It's not working today, and it never has worked. That is the human idea of peace, and it is a lack of understanding of what peace is. It is a belief that peace is somehow out there in the external world, and peace is something that we get to experience once everybody else in the external world has come around to either our way of thinking or to at least leaving us alone to our way of thinking. And as long as the world struggles to have peace according to that definition, it will never have peace. It can never have peace according to those lines, because it doesn't understand what peace is. And one of the things that we have to consider is that for all of these thousands of years, the human beings who have been trying to lead us to peace, to tell us what peace is, perhaps didn't know what they were talking about. And you can't give something that you don't have. You know, when you get on the airplane, you're told if the oxygen masks drop out, put yours on first and then help the child next to you. Because if you pass out, you're of no help to anybody. And we live in a world where people are trying to give away what they don't have. Rather than going within and finding what it is that they're looking for first within and then sharing what they found, we have people who are trying to give us what they don't have. And we're eager in many cases to go along with their ideas. It saves us too from the task of doing the real work, which is going within, which is finding the peace within. So an example of this was when World War I was beginning. Henry Ford, who was not only rich, but he was a pacifist. Henry Ford chartered a ship and got a group of rich people together, rich pacifists together. And they were going to sail to Europe, and they were going to take the ship, and they were going to go to the different capitals in Europe. And they were going to meet with the leaders there, and they were going to convince them that this war was a bad idea, that we needed to have peace. But somewhere along the way, crossing the ocean, the people on the ship got into arguments about how they should proceed. And they couldn't agree with one another on how to bring about peace, how to do this. So they aborted the mission. It's the way that I heard the story. So they couldn't give what they didn't have. Here they were, ready to get on a ship, ready to go across the ocean, ready to tell other people how to find peace, and they couldn't find it within themselves. That's the moral of the story. So I want you to consider that if we are to experience peace, if this peace that we are to experience is the natural result of our spiritual practice, the natural result of coming into the mystical union with the divine, into a place where peace exists without any idea of no peace. Because the divine cannot know peace, as it doesn't have any experience with that which is unpeaceful. So it just knows its isness, or the Buddhists might call it the suchness of life, or in Judaism, the I am. Right? God says I am to Moses. I am, that's all, just I am. Not I am peace or not I am war, but I am. I am. So we have to recognize that the divine mind doesn't have a concept of peace as you and I have it, but the divine mind is peace. It is peace because it has nothing to struggle with or against. It is all-knowing. It is all-powerful. And it has created everything out of itself, in its image and likeness, according to its nature. So it could not create something to torment itself. It could not do that. It cannot do something that is not according to its own nature. It could not create a power of evil to torment it as its creation, to torment it as you and I. So we've got to get that clear. There is no such thing as evil in the mind of God. There is nothing to struggle with or against in the mind of God. So our idea of peace then is not in fixing everybody out there and getting everybody out there to leave us alone. Our idea of peace is in doing our spiritual practice, doing our spiritual growth, and allowing our own souls to come into that presence which knows no struggle. And that's where we experience the peace. A beam of light can travel through millions of miles of space, and it is totally unaware and unaffected by the darkness. The goodness of God is totally unaffected by what appears to be the darkness here in human experience. These are experiences that human beings are having due to our belief in separation. So I'd like to read to you from Science of Mind textbook in the glossary in the back of the textbook, Ernest Holmes' definition of peace. This is peace, a state of inner calm, an inner calm so complete that nothing can disturb it. The peace which comes only from the knowledge that it is all. Fathomless peace is meant by the peace of spirit. This is the peace to which Jesus referred when he said, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you." The infinite is always at peace because there is nothing to disturb it. A realization, not an understanding, a realization of our oneness with omnipresence brings peace. The peace which is accompanied by a consciousness of power. And Emmett Fox would go on to tell us that peace and power are what we refer to as poise. Peace and power being two of the seven main aspects of God. Poise is a derivative, a combination of the two. So when I'm talking about peace in our spiritual practice, peace in our spiritual growth, I'm talking about this inner state of calm. I'm talking about this realization of our oneness with omnipresence, our realization of the immutableness of God's nature, our realization of all power, all wisdom, right here. Now, one thing that we want to consider, as I was preparing this morning, I was just reminded of a time years ago. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and as most boys did in those days, I spent time as an altar boy. And this was in a time when the services were in Latin, Mass was in Latin. And of course, the working people did not understand Latin. You know, Latin was a dead language, and for many years the church wanted to use it because it couldn't be altered. The meaning, it meant what it meant, and it couldn't be taken out of context, was the way that they perceived it. But people didn't understand it. See? So there had to be somebody there in the service who represented the people, and that was one of the roles that as an altar boy I fulfilled. So during the ritual, during the service, the priest, the officiant, would say certain things in Latin, and then the altar boys would make a response also in Latin. And that response that we were making was supposed to be the response on behalf of the people. And if you've ever been to a Catholic service, or you've seen, maybe you've seen Mass on TV, Christmas Eve Mass and those sorts of things, there comes a time where the priest says, Pax Domino sit semper vobiscum, or Pax Domine sit semper vobiscum, which means in Latin, may the peace of the Lord be with you always. The peace of the Lord be with you always. And the altar boys would respond, et cum spiri tutuo. And I remember it was kind of catchy, had a little rhyme to it, tutuo. Et cum spiri tutuo. And that means, and with your spirit also. And we were responding on behalf of the congregation, because the assumption there was that the congregation didn't know Latin. And I thought it's kind of interesting, because here's this officiant who's telling everybody, may the peace of the Lord be with you, but in a manner that they couldn't understand. And here's somebody else trying to respond for them, speaking a language that they didn't understand. And it seems like in our society today, it seems like we all want peace, but we want somebody else to do it. We want somebody else to change. When those people stop attacking us, we'll have peace, those sorts of things. And the question that we must ask ourselves now as we come to this time of the year is, are we willing to explore our ideas of peace? And are we willing to accept the responsibility of going within and doing it for ourselves? Because in truth, nobody else can do peace for us. An officiant at a religious service can't do peace for us. An altar boy at a religious service can't do peace for us. Our politicians can't do peace for us. No one can do peace for us. But we must do it for ourselves. And we must recognize that it is an inside job. So we watch what's going on in the world. We watch what's going on in the news. And we see the human concepts struggling with each other and attacking one another and killing each other. And we have to understand that what we are seeing is the result of human thinking. Wars don't start themselves. Human beings start war. Human beings decide that they need to go kill one another. Human beings reach these decisions. And they justify those decisions, and many times they use their religions to justify those decisions. And if you watch what's going on in the debate in the last 20 years or so particularly, what you will find is the position pretty much as follows. The other side is evil. You don't negotiate with evil. You don't compromise with evil. The only thing you can do with evil is to attack it and to destroy it. And that's why we are going to attack, and you fill in the blank. And the interesting thing to me about it is both sides are saying the same thing. The only place where they differ is when you get to the fill in the blank part, is they're talking about each other. Human consciousness decides for whatever reason or reasons that it must go to war, or it wants to go to war. And usually it's financial. Right? Usually there's some type of personal gain involved. Emmett Fox says that, Africa as a continent was sitting there for thousands of years, and the Europeans paid very little attention to it until somebody discovered gold and diamonds in Africa. Then all of a sudden the colonial powers had to go down there and start flexing their muscles and claiming territory for themselves. So the human consciousness justifies its reasons for going to war. It justifies its reasons for killing, for maiming, for doing all the terrible things that we do. But it's human consciousness. It is human decisions. It is human way of thinking. Einstein told us that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. And that's what we're doing with war. We're doing the same things over and over and over again. And if you live long enough and you can look back, or if you study history, and especially if you explore the dissident views of history, the people who speak outside of the accepted doctrine, they'll give you a valuable insight. They may not always be true. I'm not saying they are, but at least they'll cause you to think in a different way. You can see that we as human beings have been doing the same things to one another for as long as we know. and we try to justify it and explain it. And it doesn't work. And it won't work. So what I'm getting to here is we wish to experience peace in this world. And the reason that we don't have peace in the world is because human consciousness contains and believes certain things that are unpeaceful. And the majority of those things, if you come back to them, if you examine them, come down to basically two ideas, or at least two that we'll talk about today. Right? One is this idea of separateness or apartness. And then the other is this idea of greed and entitlement or attachment. The Buddhists might call it attachment. We want something that another people has. We want their land. We want their water. We want their gold. We want their diamonds. We want their oil. We want something. Right? We have an attachment to whatever it is that they have, and we think we ought to have it, a sense of entitlement. And then we kind of justify our actions because they're not like us, you see. They're different than we are. They're inferior in their ideas. You know, they believe in a different God than we believe in. And if they believe in a different God than we believe in, then they must be our God's enemy. And if our God has an enemy, it's our duty to go strike down God's enemy. And we talk ourselves into justifying, talk ourselves into going and attacking. If you look back into the expansion of the European powers into the world, you know, there was this idea that if people didn't have a government or a religion similar to what the European powers had, it was okay for the European powers to go in and colonize them. They were saving them because they were bringing them the true religion. And of course they were enslaving them at the same time and causing them to go mine for gold and bringing them disease and decimation and all sorts of things that we don't want to talk about today. But my point is that it was justified. In the minds of the Europeans, they justified that. We're doing the same things today. I'm not just saying to pick on Europeans. The United States did it. All countries do it. All of the big powers do it and have done it and go out and impose our will on other people. Now I ask you, would we do that to one another if we truly believed that I and my brother are one? I and my brother are one. Would we truly do that? Just popped into my head a very long time ago. You remember Hawaii Five-0 with Jack Lord was on TV. And there was an episode about this group of people, and what they would do is they would go around and they would make friends with somebody, and then they would kill them, and then they would rob them. And of course, you know, in an hour McGarrett could solve anything, and of course he did. And at the very end, he's talking to this lady, and they were kind of religious fanatics in their thinking. And he says, how could you do this? McGarrett says to the woman, how could you do this? And she said, well, it was no crime to take their property. They were dead. They didn't need it. They were dead. So once they were dead, it wasn't stealing. We were just taking things that they weren't going to use. And McGarrett says, yeah, but you killed them. You killed them in order to take their stuff. And she says, well, they weren't kin. And it's not a sin to kill somebody who's not your kin. And that's the way that the Hollywood scriptwriter left it. But there's some truth to that. There's some truth to that in our society, in that we think that we are so different than everybody else. We are so apart from everybody else. We're so separate from everybody else that it's okay. They're not like us, so it's okay for us to go to war with them. And in fact, what we have to do, I mean, this whole idea of killing is something that the human psyche and the human soul generally rejects. So we have to work ourselves up into almost a hatred of the enemy, so that we can bring ourselves and our soldiers to the point where we can go to war, where we can attack. We have to get angry. So those are the human ideas. Those are the human ways of thinking. And now I want to bring you into the spiritual. So in the spiritual, there is no apartness. There is no separateness. There is no differentness. Ernest Holmes said, "I am not my brother's keeper. I am my brother." See, we are all one. We are all part of the same stuff and substance. We are all part of the great universal soul, or as Emerson might have called it, the oversoul. We might be different in appearance here on earth. We might be different in our experience here on earth, but we are truly brother and sister. We are truly one. Now this includes the people that we are kin with, and this includes everybody. And this includes the people we like, and this includes the people we don't like. And this includes those who would do us harm. And one of the first things that we have to consider, if we wish to truly be a vehicle for peace, the peace that passes understanding, to enter this world, we must first find it within ourselves, or else we'll have nothing to give. We'll be no better than Henry Ford and the people on the boat crossing the ocean, trying to tell others how to do peace when we can't even do it ourselves. So we must take on the responsibility and the accountability for our own personal spiritual growth. And many times what we want to do is we want to deflect, right? As human beings, when we are asked to do something we don't want to do, we tend to deflect it. In the New Testament, it tells us, we complain about the splinter in our brother's eye when we've got a plank or a beam sticking out of our own eye. We want everybody else to do it, but we don't want to do it. And we have to let go of that. We have to catch ourselves when we are deflecting. When we say, but I don't understand. If I do my spiritual practice and all these other people are out there wanting to kill us, what's going to change? We do that. And we have to say, well, nevertheless, you have to go within and do your spiritual practice. Because what we have to remember is that we are all part of the same consciousness. We are all part of what Carl Jung called the collective consciousness, or the matrix, for those of you who are into the movies The Matrix. We are all part of the human race. And what you and I do, what we do to clear up race consciousness, right? The only place we have to work, which is within ourselves. What we do there has an effect everywhere. What we do there is working at the level of cause, which is erroneous thinking. And we are not working in the level of effect, which is to hit each other with a bigger hammer. So what we must come to recognize is that our spiritual practice, our spiritual duty, if you want to call it that, is for us to go within and to dissolve everything within our own consciousness that separates us from the divine, from God, or any other human being. Any other human being. And this is quite simply, this is what New Testament tells us when it says, pray for your enemies and bless those who would do you harm. Now, in our kind of twisted way of human thinking, we've taken it to mean that somehow we're praying that God will make them just like us because we're so good. And what it means to me is, can we recognize that they too are spiritual beings? Can we recognize that they too are on a spiritual path of evolution, working their way to the realization of the presence of the divine, the mystical union, the peace that passes understanding? And can we recognize that what they are doing out of ignorance, just as the mistakes that we have made and the harm that we have caused ourselves and others, we have done out of ignorance. So the task then is to is to go within. And I have to stress that this is not something that you do for an hour on a Sunday and then go back the rest of the week the way you were. It's not something that you do 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening when you're doing your spiritual practice, and then go back the rest of the day doing things the way you normally do it. This is a constant awareness. It is a commitment to become constantly aware of what we are thinking, what we are feeling, and how we are reacting to people and circumstances around us, and to catching ourselves when we are thinking thoughts of separation, where we are thinking thoughts of attachment, of greed. I mean, think about the wars. If we didn't have attachment and we didn't have greed, how many wars would have stopped? If we didn't have this sense of entitlement that oh, there's somebody else has good over there and I need to take it from them so I can have it, and they can't, but I can do that because somehow they're different than I am. I'm better than they are. They're not civilized. They don't worship the same God. All those kind of excuses. So where within our own consciousness are we believing in separation? Where within our own consciousness are we struggling with attachments and with greed? And what can we possibly do during the course of the day to catch ourselves when we are thinking this, and to remind ourselves of the unity of all life, of the goodness of God in each and every person? What can we do to dissolve the ideas in human consciousness that are responsible for war and for terrorism and for all the terrible things that we see? What can we do to dissolve those within our own consciousness? So in Buddhism, I'll give you a reference in Buddhism, and if you want to go look it up on the internet during the week, you might find some good ideas there. Everything that's there we may not understand or agree with, but there's certainly a lot of good there that we can look at. And in Buddhism, there's something called 8 verses for training the mind, or 8 stanzas for training the mind. If you search for either one of those, they will come up. And these are things, these are practices, these are ways of thinking and behaving that the Buddhist adherents are given to help them break out of the human mindset that continues to cause war and suffering. There are 8 practices to develop compassion, right? To see others as ourselves, altruism, to desire to be helpful to other people. And if we had compassion, if we desired to be helpful, how many of our wars would not exist in the first place? So one of the first things that we can do is in the morning, as we begin our day, can we recognize that each and every other person, each and every other sentient being, each and every other person in the world is a gift of God? The ones we like, the ones we don't like, and the ones in between, the ones we don't even think about, they never come to mind. But each and every person is a gift of God, a gem, a jewel, a spark. They may not be behaving accordingly. We're probably not behaving accordingly. But each and every person is a gift of God. And can I do my very best today, this day, can I do my very best to see and to appreciate each and every person that I come in contact with, that I might hear about on the news? Each and every person as a gem, as a gift from God. And of course, in order to do that, I have to be able to look into the mirror and recognize that I too am a gem, am a gift of God. And we need to do that with humility, not with arrogance, right? Mac Davis's "Oh Lord, it's so hard to be humble" keeps popping in my head when I think of that. But can we look in the mirror and recognize that right where we are, the very love and the very presence of God is in there doing its very best to express itself. And that is a gift to the world. Can we then take that and recognize it's true of each and every other person? And we refuse to be fooled by appearances, right? From time to time, people would come and into class or into church, and they would say, I just don't know what to do. You know, someone in my life just upsets me greatly. And I would say, do what I do. Just say to yourself, okay, God, I know you're in there somewhere. I'm going to find you. I'm going to find you. Ernest Holmes says that what our job as spiritual practitioners is to uncover God wherever we go, in every person, in the midst of every apparent discord. The peace and the harmony of God is there. If we come into a group of people, or even if it's just in contact with another person, can we let go of our agenda do we have a need to feel smarter than they are, or better than they are, or more competent than they are, or richer than they are, or that we have a better position, or all of these attachments, you know? Do we need people to like us in order to feel good about ourselves? And if people don't like us, do we feel bad about ourselves? Well, then we're attached to their opinion. Do we need to have a lot of stuff to feel good about ourselves? And if we lose our stuff, do we feel bad about ourselves? Then we are attached to our stuff. So can we go into our communications with other people, and what the Buddhists would say is to make ourselves the lowest one in the room. And that doesn't mean to denigrate ourselves. It means to not have an agenda, not have an attachment to how other people need to behave towards us, or what they need to give towards us, or any of that. Can we just be there? Can we just be there and be God's love? Stop the monkey mind from making all kinds of comparisons. And then the tough one. The tough one is when I meet someone and I am upset. Can I be willing to go within and dissolve the reason I was upset? That's a tough one, because most of the time what we want to say is, that made me mad, that person made me mad, they shouldn't have done that, all those kind of things. And it may be very well true. Maybe they shouldn't have done that. But being upset about it is a decision that we have made, even at a level below our conscious awareness. So the bottom line, what it comes down to is that the peace that passes understanding is not this human idea of peace that when everybody else leaves me alone, we'll be peaceful. Right? That just doesn't work. Even if everybody left us alone to be peaceful, we'd find a way to start fighting amongst ourselves. Because peace is something that is an internal state of being. Right? Spinoza said there's more to peace in the absence of war. It is a way of being. So can we recognize then that peace is a way of being, and it is a way of being that we experience when we have moved into that mystical union, when we have moved into the experience of the presence of the divine, which we have done by constantly dwelling on the presence of God around us. And then deliberately catching ourselves when we're thinking and behaving out of accord with that presence, and asking ourselves what's going on, and being willing to release it. We don't have to know what it is. We just have to know that we were upset by it, and say whatever it is within me, whatever it is within me that I need to let go of right now, I am willing, ready, and able to let go of it. To let go of it. So can we give up this idea then that somehow we need to figure out how to go fix the whole world out there, to get on our charter boat and go over there, wherever there is, and fix those people? and recognize that the first thing that I must do is go within and experience the peace within. Then if I meet people, I'll have something to give. Before that, I won't have anything to give but opinions. Can I go within and find the peace that passes understanding and be willing to share that? Can I recognize that by doing that, I'm doing something very real and tangible and more beneficial to the world than war? That what I am doing is I am going straight into race consciousness. Right where I am, it is. And I am helping to clear it up. Right? I'm pouring a little bit of clear water into the mud. And over time, as we get enough clear water into the muddy water becomes clear. This experience of peace is our true nature. This experience of peace is our true destiny. The degree to which we experience it or not is kind of a yardstick of where we are on our spiritual path. So I ask you to consider this year, as we get ready to begin another year of our spiritual growth together, I ask you to consider, is this the year that I am ready, I am willing, and I am able to go within, to discover the peace that passes understanding that has always been there. To stop waiting for everybody out there to behave differently, to think differently, but to take responsibility and accountability for my spiritual growth by going within. If we will do that, not only will we individually begin to experience more peace, but the world that we are part of will begin to experience more peace as well. Joel Goldsmith asks his students to meditate 5 times a day. And he asks them to take one of those 5 periods and to meditate for no other reason than to experience the presence of God. Not to ask for anything, not to tell God anything, not to think about a scripture verse, not to think about love, nothing. Just sit and be still and know. And let God have its way with us. And what he tells his students is when they finish that meditation that they went into without agenda, when they finish that meditation, what they are to say to themselves is, through this meditation, a greater desire to know God has entered the world. Through our desire to experience the peace that passes understanding, a greater desire to know God is the world. Let's put the Spirit